Joelitsin is recalling the startup of Abjanusa, Asociación Brasilera Gay Ironbound Newark, USA, being formed within the space of a gay-affirming church in the neighborhood of Ferry Street. In 2008, there were several meetings held with interested residents to discuss forming a group with social activities and shared topics of interest, including immigration rights. We invited an attorney from the American Friends Service Committee to give a talk on political asylum based on sexual orientation. Joelitsin continues by saying, and there's so much to do. We need a social political organization to work with the gay community on various issues in the areas of HIV, STD, and PrEP, education, health, recreation, and culture. Here he recognized the urgency. There's so much to do, and work on building community and groupings in light of mutual interests in various areas he points out above. He adds that in Newark at large, outside the Ironbound, I know that it has done more, but specifically in the Ironbound, there isn't, to bring the community who lives here together. In effect, Joelitsin makes comparisons here between Newark at large and the Ironbound and acknowledges the progress the latter has made to bring LGBTQ community together. Byron recently tried to go to the Gay Pride Parade in downtown Newark this past year, but due to back problems, he was not able to go. A Brazilian friend was interested in going with him. In our conversation, it became evident that Byron did not know that Gay Pride had formed years ago. I asked him, do you think that there could be a way to, say, bring African-American gays at Newark Pride and Brazilian Ironbound gays together? He answered, yes, that can be done, but the Gay Pride wasn't around here. It was a little far, end quote. Yet Joelitsin doesn't necessarily make the connection with Newark at large and the Ironbound coming together for this kind of work. Ultimately, both consider the geographic divisions between Newark at large and the Ironbound. Joelitsin hints at a distinctive Ironbound queer immigrant culture when comparing it to Newark at large queer culture. Similarly, Danilo suggests the need to build a strong queer Brazilian social network, like a Facebook group of shared information, resources, and opportunities that's strictly within the Ironbound context. Perhaps according to the perspectives below, building a non-committal social network is more realistic. I'm getting to some perspectives. Building a non-committal social network is more realistic to many of these interviewees here. Joelitsin focuses on how queers in the Ironbound generally live vidas tan corridas, or hectic lives that limit their availability for organizing. He adds that, quote, they refuse to take a half hour to engage in discussions to improve gay community, end quote. Joelitsin is pointing out that queers are too busy in their individually driven lives to devote time to communal initiatives among queers. Byron, on the other hand, reasons that, quote, there is no interest in the political. They don't care. They're still partying, end quote. In other words, he views that most queers work hard and play hard without any interest to organize. Danilo adds that, quote, I don't see no one organizing at this moment right now, end quote. Similarly, Joelitsin says, quote, I think a person is missing with the values and motivation to organize. In effect, Danilo and Joelitsin arrive at the fact that someone needs a strong vision outside the individualized neoliberal context of the Ironbound to forge a communal vision among queers. Even more, both Joelitsin and Danilo admit that they are both unavailable for these kinds of communal initiatives, but for different reasons. Even while Danilo would be a strong candidate for this organizer position because he has proven to relate with people and bring different people together, he says, quote, I don't think I would be the best person to do it. But then he suggests more clearly that he does not have the time for organizing or being responsible for the organization because his other commitments, because of his commitments, like his self-run nightlife business. Yet he ends by saying, quote, but I would love to be part of something like that, and I think it's needed, end quote. In Joelitsin's situation, he's afraid he cannot lead because of his current undocumented status by saying, quote, I'm going to be very exposed given my immigration and HIV status, and that may burden my immigration process. Joelitsin believes, therefore, that his intent to organize may be perceived as a threat or, quote, starting trouble, and equated to a reactive ethnicity or contrary to good citizenship under neoliberal ideology. As an Afro-Brazilian, his blackness may be negatively racialized within neoliberal, racialized white Ironbound. Nightlife possibilities. Danilo as entertainer for all continues. So here's the last part of Danilo's, and we're going to talk about Twister. Yeah. In my discussion with Danilo about several parties he has thrown throughout the Ironbound, we discussed particular moments when he was connected with Newark at Large's Pride Center, which he referred to as the Pride People. He recounts about how early on at Guitar Bar, which closed in 2011, there was engagement among the owners, workers, and himself there. I'm not sure how they connected, but when we used to do Guitar Bar, we actually had an event with them. So they might have heard about the place or went there. I don't know if X person was the manager there and contacted them for Pride Month. I think that what people from the Pride Center wanted to do was something different. Every Wednesday, happy hour. They might have looked for a gay place to do that. This happened during the last year of Guitar Bar, 2010 or 2011. In this segment, Danilo remembers an event held by the Pride Center for Pride Month. While Danilo treats this more as a business incentive between Guitar Bar and Newark's Pride Center, these Pride events are indications of the Pride Center bridging proximity and relationality to the Ironbound community. Also, Danilo's posturing here is distant with this engagement, which suggests apathy to this Newark at-large group with its everyday life and business in the Ironbound. Our conversation shifts from then to now by discussing Twister, a new full-time gay bar that opened up in the past year at the end of Ferry Street. He recalls the recent Pride events here at Twister this past year by saying, on the Pride Month, the owners at Twister started doing a happy hour with the Pride people that organizes Pride here at Newark. They are having this whole different crowd come in. It's more black people and some Latinos, but it's more the black crowd. So now we have this mix. It was Brazilians before that, still come. So like yesterday, I worked the karaoke, and there was a good amount of black people, a good amount of Brazilians, and a good amount of Latino people. It's a mixed crowd, all singing their styles with karaoke. In this segment, we see that Danilo is more engaged with a different crowd, not from the Ironbound, who was with members of Newark Pride Center. He emphasizes that, quote, it's more black people and some Latinos, end quote, that changes the ethnic and racial composition of this event to what Danilo seems accustomed to. Having said that, Danilo articulates that a, quote, mix or a significant cohesion among the different sets of racial groups, blacks, Latin, Brazilian, occurred in which they shared the space of the Twister to sing their different cultural styles together peacefully. This is different from the nights that Byron had mentioned to me where only Brazilian music was played and where he heard Pablo Vittar's song mixed by a DJ on several nights. While Twister will cater to a Brazilian clientele only on certain nights, the non-Brazilian owners at Twister seem interested in building a relationship with the Pride Center and market themselves to all Newark's gay, queer clientele. Conclusion. In conclusion, I have documented through a re-interviewing of previous Brazilian subjects the ways that queer life in this neighborhood continues growing more open and visible for many. Several of these queers have attained a public status as longtime workers or entertainers for the public that have also helped shape gay visibility and openness among queers in a heteronormative majority and before 2009. The passing of gay marriage has evidently become an option for queers among Ironbound queers, and as a result has helped several of my informants and their friends build their lives accordingly, or resembling a homonormative status. Even with several strides for a more tolerant life within the Ironbound, I examine that these steps forward are really complicit with neoliberal ideologies of individual success, worth, and good ethnicity that have discouraged and alienated queer community building among Brazilians themselves and other Latinos who live in the Ironbound or coalescing with African American and Puerto Rican queer Newark at-large groups. Ultimately, such communal building within the Ironbound and more broadly with Newark groups will encourage knowledge sharing and build familiarity outside neoliberal values of self-sufficiency and consumption, but instead around urgent discussions on, for example, HIV, STD preventative education, queer immigration, and elder and youth needs to continue raising the quality of life for Ironbound queers and empowering them. As some of my interviews have come to realize that as of late, communal buildings has not been an accomplishment. Perhaps this realization may be a step towards taking initiative in that direction. Thank you.
So, thank you for that. Victoria will offer a response, and then I can moderate some Q&A and back and forth.
Well, thank you for all the work that you did.
Yeah, thank you.
I was born and raised in the Ironbound before it became very open. You know, parents are Brazilian. My brother is gay. My cousin is transgender. I'm born and raised in an evangelical cult.
Yes.
So, it's like a lot of that really resonated with me. And I actually, before, so I actually, was a little brainwashed, but very repressed for a very long time. And then what kind of liberated me was joining the debate team when I was 12 years old. My teacher introduced me to debate. And that's like how I kind of found myself, because I found myself being very depressed and I didn't really understand why, I guess because I didn't understand myself. And from being involved in the debate team, I kind of woke up and I kind of just like started learning like about all of these different issues, and I started seeing the way in which my own family and my own community was problematic, as the more we're older. So I really, like, it inspired me, if anything, because I, for a very, very long time in Newark, because I lived in the Ironbound until I was 14, but then I moved outside of the Ironbound, and I actually had the ideology of staying in the Ironbound before I moved out. Like, a lot of people in the Ironbound like to stay in the Ironbound, and like, I did not want to leave, because it was very lively, and I was very connected to my culture, I was very connected to the people there, and I didn't know what was outside, I never needed to. I actually don't have a car, so I'm like, I don't even have a license. I never needed it. So I'm like, wow, okay. Now this is like making even more sense, like all of this research that you're doing. And then so it's like then when I moved out of the Ironbound, then I started seeing like, wow, there's like so much more Newark has to offer outside of the Ironbound. And then I started noticing that there is really a disconnect between the Ironbound and the rest of Newark. And how like that could, there is like white supremacist, like anti-black ideology within that community, and how it's like also neoliberal and also like work hard, play hard, so I mean, it's an amazing paper, that's all I can say. So, I mean, but I guess, I grew up, that was my childhood there, and I would say that, also, but my experience is very unique because I'm bisexual, fluid. I use a lot of terms interchangeably. I also like even my gender identity is very, very fluid. So like I feel like I created a term for myself called femfluid, where like I feel like my center is femininity, but in which I express myself or in which I feel alternates between masculinity. And some days I'll feel completely masculine, and other days I won't. And recently I just got scrutiny for my hair from my mom because I've recently just had the courage to just like be myself, and she was like telling me like, do you understand that your life's going to be so much more harder that if you're gay? And I had to lie to her to be like, no. And I mean, technically it wasn't a lie, right? But it's like I had to be like, well, I'm not, but I advocate for these people. Like I advocate for queer people. And she was like, well, they're weak. Like they only care about the desires. Don't be a slave to your desires. And I'm like, they're not a slave to their desires because it's not easy to be those people. Like I had to, like advocate. Like it's kind of weird, this in-betweenness, right? Because at the same time, I'm Brazilian, I'm very white passing, so there's a lot of white Brazilians that relate to me. And but I also don't identify within their normative ideas, so I feel very disconnected. And then like, I'm bisexual, so then it's like, there's a lot of people that are also like homonormative, because it's like one or the other, and it's also like, I'm also, and so it's like a lot of disconnect there. And then on top of that, you're not out to my family. I'm not. My brother's out. My brother's gay. So it's like, yeah, that's a whole. And then and then seeing like even with my cousin, and then like there's a good chunk of evangelicals in Ironbound actually, like a good chunk. So the fact that you mentioned that is even more important. Like and I was raised in that community, like literally. So being queer and then growing up in that environment, like. It's just like it's brutal because literally people will make you homeless and they will and they won't feel mercy for it because that's just like what's best for you, like you're my child, like I own you. It's like this idea of like possession, and that happened to my cousin actually, and I had to advocate for her for a little bit, and I had to like create fundraising for her so she wouldn't remain homeless, and so I need
That's amazing.
Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
That is incredible. That's wonderful. That's such a communal initiative. These guys, that you want. Yes, that's important. That kind of model of shared, mutual interests, right? I mean, it's wonderful to hear that, at your age that, these strategies of survival that you're pushing, that you're forging that. That's meaningful and that's so important, and that's definitely very anti-neoliberal, right? From what we see in these immigrant narratives, So, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you're
keep
fine.
going.
I mean, I could go on for days about queerness. Trust me. just you know, even with my brother, like he's a gay man, but very homonormative. And I fear for him because my father is very very aggressive. I'll phrase that lightly. He's not a very gentle man. He grew up very aggressive. And actually, I found out when I turned 20, all of a sudden, that he's gay. And I'm like, and it was like my mom was trying to save him from his gayness. And that's why they were together. And then I was just like, what the hell? Like everything I knew was like shifted. And I'm like, this makes so much sense now. And then so with that being said, I think my father expresses his aggression. Like he doesn't have this form of acceptance with himself. So that's why he's aggressive. And he's projected that onto his children and onto my mom. And because of that, my brother, I see that with my brother, he's internalized it. And I fear for him because I want him to be married, I want him to be open, I want him to just be gay, have a husband. And he's just like isolated himself and very aggressive, just like my father. So he's internalized that heteronormativity, that toxic masculinity from him. And I see that happening, but I just feel like it's very difficult because I'm trying to access him. Like I'm trying to be like, hey, I accept you, we're both queer here. But it's also like, disconnect here, right? Because I'm also not out of the closet and I'm bisexual, so it's like, right?
Yeah.
Even though, again, I've been very active in the community, I've been doing a lot of my activism a lot, so it's like interesting. And he's not political, he's very apolitical, that's another thing, so.
And I mean, and moving away from like political, apolitical, I wonder, because what I'm hearing is, you know, what would it mean for your brother to just talk to other folks? Like, you know, you're trying to build, it sounds like you're trying to build circles. Have you tried building like support groups amongst each other? Just being able to just sit down and talk, right? Like where you talk once a week, you guys get together. I'm just curious, I'm trying to think out loud, right? With limited resources, right? Just being able to talk and build familiarity amongst each other, right? That's important. So I'm wondering, is that something that you thought about, or is that something that interests you?
It is something that I thought about, actually. And I feel like the focus that I want with that is more kids, actually. Like, I feel like a lot of the kids, especially in Ironman, like I mentioned it, we were talking about it earlier, there were 2 trans kids that killed themselves at Ann Street School in Ironbound. And we don't know their names, and that's like really unfortunate. So it's just like, and I'm just my personal experience, and I have no shame saying their school specifically, because like I really don't like their administration. But like working with that school, like they're super heteronormative and super homophobic. And the reason why I'm aware of this is because I literally mentioned LGBT education to them, and their response was like, well, why do you think that's necessary? And then like also being like, oh, well, you know, well, what if it's Hollywood that's making them confused, and now all these kids are just becoming like suicidal and they're becoming homeless, and it's because they're starting to question themselves. It was almost like they were blaming their oppression on the fact, on their identity, instead of blaming it on the actual oppressor. So it's like, so for me, like, that is something I'm very passionate about, being from there and then seeing how it's affecting like my family and my cousin and my brother.
Do you have spaces, or are there spaces?
Like the thing I have a thing is that a lot of the Ironbound, like they would want those spaces and I think they would benefit from it. My only issue is that they would want to stay in Ironbound. Like they would definitely wouldn't want, I want to like be able, I feel like I probably have to, I guess that's what I'm thinking about in strategy, like that kind of really annoys me. It's just like, if these spaces were created, would they still be within the confines of all of this like heteronormativity and homonormativity that you talked about, and would it just perpetuate that? And like, you know, and would it just keep people comfortable being in their little bubble and not just like span out, you know? I mean, now there is starting to be, like you mentioned, because Newark Gay Pride has been doing a lot of events at Twister's Bar, which is good. A lot of people at Twister's Bar aren't necessarily from the Ironbound either, they come from different places. So that's like a really good way for people to interact. But I want to see more mixing outside of just when Newark Gay Pride is around. Like I feel like, because, and it was really easy for me to bond with the people there because they're Brazilian and I'm like, Brazilian, yay. So, but I mean, I feel like what I've been seeing a lot is that the participation, the mixing, the commingling has been decreasing now that Newark Gay Pride isn't there since the Pride Month is over. Like I want to see that consistently happening throughout the year and not just Pride Month at Newark, so. I feel like I answered your question, right? I don't know if I, so.
Let's see. So, are you right now doing anything in particular in terms of the activism? What's your focus right now with the activism? Is there any particular project that you're working on?
LGBT initiative at my organization.
Okay.
Just starting there, starting small. We did actually, for the first time ever, attend North Gay Pride this year, and that was a lot. Thank you. I had to pull an all-nighter. It was a lot. It was worth it. It was worth it. I wish I could show pictures of the event. It was great. I had like all the flags of the different sexual orientations and the gender identities on there, and it was like, it was just nice. So, yeah, I mean that's gonna happen again. Clearly, like we're gonna attend North Gay Pride. But I guess I guess I really want to focus on LGBT education in these schools. But I guess that's too like head on. That's obviously going to get pushed back. So I feel like support group is probably the best way to start. I guess again, my question would then be strategy. Like, how would I do that so that people aren't perpetuating their own ignorance?
I think what you might find too is like generation perspectives, you know, because I remember, just in my own experience, you know, in sitting around, you know, gay men who are in their 70s, they don't understand anything about gender, not like binary, non-binary.
So true.
They're very critical over, you know, these kind of, you know, self, you know, like kind of being outside of the boxes of sexual identity, if you will, right? So I think that you do have to kind of be willing to meet somebody. Where are you with your sexual and gender identity? Let's have a conversation. Let's build familiarity. You know. So I think with these conversations, you just have to meet someone halfway, and you have to build a conversation with that person. I think that you can have a general. I think that's really great and critical that you're being. I don't want to refine notions of heteronormativity and homonormativity. That's great. That's awesome. You know. But I think that you have to meet someone halfway where they are in their lives.
Yeah.
You know, and I think any ability to really be open and have a genuine discussion is a huge step,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that people nowadays are so reserved, and I mean even having somebody come and talk to you about their personal life is a huge step,
Yeah.
right? I think that it will be wonderful because I think that there are youth, sounds from your story that youth need to be out,
Yes.
and young adults need to be out there talking to each other.
Yes.
You know, something as simple as a roundtable discussion every Tuesday at, you know, a cafe is a huge start, you know?
Yeah, and I was actually gonna mention that, you know, I feel like a lot of things, there is like a almost, like with my cousin, I guess what I'm seeing happening to her is that she's almost normative in her own way, and the way in which she identifies within her own like femininity, and the way she identifies within her sexuality. Like we were having a conversation, because I haven't seen her in a long time, you know, so recently, and she was just talking to me about women being like, oh, you know, like a lot of, and she was talking a lot of like really negative stuff about other trans women that, because when she was staying at the shelter that I helped her find, and she was talking a lot of, I can curse, right? She was talking a lot of like negative bullshit about other trans women, being like, oh, well, other trans women, like they're very promiscuous, they're not like women, they're not like appropriate women, and I'm just like, what do you mean you say that? Like I'm trying to educate her kindly, right? Just being like, she's like, oh, a lot of them get into sex work, blah, 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 a lot of them do this, they don't really care about waiting, they don't really care about making money in a stable way, and like basically like judging them for like their life choices, and it's just kind of like, you know, it's heteronormative in its own way, and not that I judge her for identifying within her gender, clearly I don't, like, it's just like the idea in which, like the idea of what it means to be an appropriate woman, like a good woman. She's like internalizing that, and that like hurts me to see a little bit, because I've never been no appropriate woman, like, right, like I literally ran around the parking lot at after church playing with the dudes. My dad would grab me in my arm and be like, women don't run, like, and I'm just like, internally, clearly,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean, so that kind of hurts to see, but at the same time, I feel like there's like this weird in between that I'm trying to understand, like kind of like being unapologetic and correcting her when she's being like ignorant, but then also like connecting with her on where she identifies. And like that in betweenness has been very hard, and I find myself in my room thinking about that very often.
Yeah.
So
you know, I think what's interesting is, I'll just say, in the times that I've been going to this, because I go to a coming out group, and I actually say that I come out for a second time in my life. And I'm going out to this coming out group in Lake Worth, Florida. There's an LGBT center called Compass. And the reason why I say I'm coming out a second time is because I'm really trying to build gay community more so than ever. I find myself around straight folks all the time. And I really feel like I really need to make a concerted effort to really get out there and build community for myself. Anyway, having said that, the moderator who's there, you know, who's been there for the year that I've been there, she just doesn't have an agenda. We all go there and we start talking, okay, it's coming up, but we start talking about anything, you know? And ultimately, sometimes I'm like, this is pointless, what are we talking about? But then other times, you know, people are really talking about what they're feeling, you know? And so I just want to push you a little bit and say, maybe have an agenda, but not really, you know? Like, have some things that you want, but don't have these huge roaring expectations. Just getting people to come together is a huge thing, you know? I mean, as an activist, as someone who's conscious and aware, having meaningful discussions is a huge thing. Getting somebody to just talk and say something about what they're feeling, what they're thinking is important. But that's what I mean, she really doesn't have an agenda when we talk, but yet people come and they come with what they have to talk about. So.
It's really inspiring, thank you. I was going to mention one other thing, is that I feel like a lot of like queer communities are just like, it's associated with like gay bars and drinking a lot. And like statistically like queer people, like gay, lesbian, bisexual have one of the highest, you know, rates of substance abuse.
Yes.
And that's something that I've observed and realized, because like in my life of like coming out and like engaging in the queer community and, you know, being a part of it, I find myself in those spaces, and I don't mind those spaces, but it's like sometimes I just want to have like a nice little poetry slam or like,
yeah,
like, you know what I mean?
Oh my God, yeah.
And it's like also really
Definitely.
expensive to drink all the time. I'm not trying to
No,
do that. You know,
no.
like kind of like that guy you mentioned. That's what I'm saying. Like, oh, so many different things about those experiences. I'm like, wow, like, why it's so jam-packed. Yeah, just like I'm not trying to drink every weekend. I can't afford it. I have student loans. Like, you know, I'm also trying to save up, you know, so I can move out and have my cousin move in with me, things like that. You know what I mean? So, it's just kind of like I feel like there needs to be spaces for queer youth, especially.
But here's the huge irony, because here I am thinking about it. You know what? I'm going to connect you with those pastors that I connected, you know, a couple of years ago. It's a church, a space in a Lutheran church, a gay affirming church. Would you be up for that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Not evangelical. I promise you.
Thank God.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, so speaking of moderators without agendas, I just want to say first, thank both of you, because you may have noticed I've literally done nothing, because you just carried this whole thing, and that is fantastic. I actually had questions, but I think I want to make sure we have time for folks who are here to throw in comments or questions. So I'll table my own ideas, and if we hit a dry spell, I'll jump in. But can we open the floor just to see if people have comments or questions for both of you? Not to put pressure on people.
Well, I'll ask a question. So one of the things that, so I really enjoyed your paper, and I live in the Ironbound, and have lived there just for a couple of years. But one of the things that seems so important right now in changing the Ironbound is gentrification and sort of the economic changes that are happening in the neighborhood. And I was wondering, when you were talking to your narrators, your interviewees, did they talk about that, like how that has affected their lives in the neighborhood, or if you don't look like you have something to say about that too. So I mean, I'm just curious how that is playing out, because it seems like it's so important right now, and how that like plays into being shaped.
You want to take a?
I appreciate you 110%. Yes.
Yeah.
I just feel like gentrification, when it comes down to talking about it, people really don't want to talk about it. And like, I really feel like it's displacing people. Like, that's colonization 2.0. Like, we need to talk about it. You know what I mean? Like, that is important stuff. So I really appreciate you for bringing it up. And I mean, I work for ICC, and ICC is doing a lot of the work that's pushing back on that kind of stuff. Like a lot of people, undocumented folks especially, are getting a lot of abuse from their landlords, who are just, I mean, I'm not specific to queerness in particular, but
Yeah.
just to gentrification.
Sure.
Just like literally today, there was one particular client that he has sent her 4 different paperwork of like, that was signed by court, quote unquote, sending it to her repeatedly, even though she's been paying rent, trying to justify to kick her out and try to increase rent. And she can't really have legal charges against this guy because she's undocumented, so then her options become even more limited.
Right.
There's actually this one Brazilian client that I had at one point, and clearly like I felt very connected because they were Brazilian, so it's like my community, so I have all that love and whatever. And she was undocumented as well, and like that was really tough for her. It was like, and there's a lot of things that happen. The renting rooms, like he mentioned, is basically very popular in the Ironbound, and splitting rent because it's so expensive and it's also really, really congested. So I mean, I think that congestion does build a lot of communities. So it's like good and bad in some ways, but so she was doing a lot of back rent. So it was like she was paying her roommate, so that roommate could pay the landlord. But what happened is that the roommate took the money and never paid the landlord, so she got kicked out. And that's like, it's like a lot of weird situations like that. And they're renting out basements, like really small apartments, and like people really want to be there. So it's like a lot of landlords get away with that. So, in terms of like how it's affecting the queer community, I mean, I think the way it's affecting the queer community would be more so like they're just, I mean, just for me, I didn't just speak for myself and for my family. Like, I personally can't move back into the community I was born and raised in because of that, because I can't afford it.
Right.
And like my brother can't, and my cousin can't. My cousin lives in a different part of Newark, which is good for her. Like she's like, you know, doing well now. She had a whole like sports car or whatever. But she can't move back to where she was born and raised in either because of that gentrification. So I think it's just like, and she wasn't necessarily displaced, like she wasn't getting abused from her landlord, but she was displaced in the aspect that it's like she got kicked out of her home for being who she was, and then also like she can't go back because she got deported. And combined with like socioeconomic stuff with LGBT folks, especially in Newark.
Right.
John's got a hand up, although I don't know if you.
Yeah, one of my interviewees actually brought something up. He says, after 2013, the Ironbound's face changed. It's changed a lot with new buildings, new businesses. We have stadiums now in Harrison, downtown, which brings a lot of people in. We have Whole Foods, we have Nike store. The downtown area changed a lot too, so it's growing. A lot of buildings have been built here now. There's a project to build a 12-floor building right by Penn Station, which wasn't allowed before. They finally approved it. So the Ironbound is changing and the faces are changing. You know, when I read this and I think about, you know, why he's bringing this up, he's witnessing the changes. But I think that some of these folks need to be educated on what gentrification really is
Seriously.
doing. You know what I mean? I think a lot of them are just so busy with their everyday lives. You know, there's not that community understanding of, like, when you go to Pilsen in Chicago, which I was there for a couple of months, a lot of Mexicans are up in arms about gentrification happening. Ironbound, like, a lot of folks